My mother called my little girl unattractive at her birthday celebration, so I severed ties and removed her from every picture. Now she's on social media, shedding tears and playing the victim. My daughter Emily's first birthday was supposed to be soft and forgettable in all the right ways, like a gentle breeze in May or the scent of cake that lingers on your fingers long after the last bite has been savored. It was a modest gathering of family and friends in the backyard, with mismatched folding chairs scattered across the grass. Paper plates sagged under the weight of store-bought cupcakes, and children shrieked with abandon. The kind of day you wouldn't write a poem about, but you might share a few blurry photos online with a caption like, "Can't believe she's already won," and then move on. I had no intention of making it a lasting memory, at least not in the way I do now. Emily was dressed in a soft lavender onesie adorned with a tiny butterfly on the chest, and one of her shoes vanished within the first 15 minutes. My partner, Tom, stood beside me, awkwardly cradling her as we sang happy birthday too slowly and too loudly. My sister Lisa cracked a joke about our tone-deaf family, and everyone laughed a little too heartily, as we often do. We overcompensated. The air was filled with the scent of plastic utensils, citronella candles, and grilled hot dogs. It should have been a wonderful day. Then my mother arrived late, as usual, with a gift far too extravagant for the occasion, wrapped in shiny silver paper, as if we were celebrating a royal event rather than a baby smearing frosting into her own eye. Margaret never knew how to read a room. All she knew was how to walk in and change the atmosphere. She kissed Emily's head without making eye contact, then turned to me, smiling with her lips but not her eyes. "You look exhausted," she murmured, just loud enough for Lisa to hear. "Still holding on to that baby weight, huh?" I laughed quickly and instinctively because I had spent my entire life trying not to react when she made her cuts. Tom tried to redirect her attention by asking if she wanted a hot dog or something to drink, but she waved him off like he was a pesky fly. She seemed overly focused on surveying the party, as if she were inspecting a battlefield. The incident happened as we were trying to encourage Emily to blow out her single candle. Everyone crowded around the small table, phones out and voices mingling with feigned enthusiasm. I leaned in close, smiling, and steadied Emily's tiny fingers as she reached for the flame. Then my mother leaned down, her lips almost brushing my ear, and said, "She's going to grow up looking like you." I didn't turn to look at her. I didn't even blink. I literally froze there mid-smile, one hand on my daughter's small wrist, the other gripping my phone as if it were about to explode. The candle flickered. Emily made a sneeze-like sound, and the flame extinguished. Everyone applauded. The moment passed, but I did not. Later that night, after Emily had drifted off to sleep and the last of the frosting had been wiped from the patio, I sat on the couch scrolling through photos as if searching for something specific. I didn't know what. Not at first. Then I found it. It was blurry and overexposed. My face was slightly tilted, my mouth in that strange half-smile you get when you're about to laugh, but something feels off. My mother was in the corner of the shot, just visible behind my shoulder. Her face was close to mine, lips curved like a hook, and eyes focused. She looked like a different woman. Nobody else in the shot seemed to notice her. They were all focused on Emily, but I saw it. I saw her. I sat there staring at the photo for too long. Tom entered from the kitchen, drying his hands with a towel. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Just some pictures," I replied without moving. "That one's cute," he added, referring to a photo of Emily with frosting in her hair. But I didn't show him the second one. I didn't say anything. I quietly saved it in a folder labeled evidence, all uppercase. The problem with mothers like mine is that they make you question whether your memories are your own or hers. She had a way of twisting things. So, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or simply not healing. But this time, I had proof. I had a snapshot of the exact moment my brain said enough. That was the first picture I removed her from. I opened my editing app, the same one kids used to smooth their skin and whiten their teeth, and I started small. I cropped her out. I didn't cry. I simply nodded. What else can you do when someone delivers a truth like that? You either let it seep into your bones or spit it out before it sticks. I let it settle for years. But now I have Emily. And something about becoming a mother makes you want to either shield your child from the world or expose her to it, piece by agonizing piece. I chose protection because I knew how sharp the initial cut could be. I'd rather she be naive than quietly bleeding before she learned to speak. So, I dug deeper than just photos. I unearthed old flash drives, cloud backups, and printed albums buried in drawers I hadn't touched in years. My mother, Margaret, was posing next to me at my wedding with a tight-lipped smirk, as if she were watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. I opened the image in an editor and meticulously painted her out. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes to erase decades of her standing too close to me, clutching me as if she were allergic to warmth. Gone. I glanced at the shot afterward. The space she had occupied was now filled with light and air. It felt better without her. Then I moved on to Christmas 3 years ago. She had told me that if I didn't cut back on the salt, Emily would likely be born cross-eyed. She said it with a giggle, a fork halfway in her mouth. I nodded, too exhausted to fight. She was no longer in the background of the photograph, replaced by the glow of the tree and my sister Lisa's toddler throwing a plastic ornament at the cat. I erased her from a total of 24 images, which is unusual given that we only had 13 guests at the party, but she managed to insert herself into every situation, as if she were certain that no moment could pass without her involvement. Lisa was the first to notice. She texted me 2 days after I published the revised album online. "Where's Mom in these pics? Did she leave early?" I composed and deleted my response 3 times before I finally typed, "She must have stepped out when those were taken." Technically, that wasn't a lie. Spiritually, perhaps. Tom noticed next. He didn't say anything right away but gave me the slow, deliberate look he reserved for when he was deciding whether to hug me or suggest therapy. Finally, during dinner, he asked, "Are you sure this is the path you want to take?" I gazed at Emily, her cheeks full of mashed peas, her face radiating love and innocence, and said, "I'm already halfway there." What I didn't mention was this: if I had a time machine, I wouldn't go back and stop myself from doing this. I would go back even further and erase Margaret from every birthday, every dance recital, and every time I stood in front of a mirror and loathed what I saw because she had given me the means to express that hatred. Late that night, I was scrolling through my phone in the dark when I noticed a message notification flash up. One line, "No greetings. Why am I blocked from your daughter's baby album?" I stared at it for so long that the screen darkened. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She understood why. She simply didn't want to say it. And to be honest, part of me was waiting to see whether she'd send another message, call, or even show up again as if nothing had happened. Pretending that I was the dramatic one, like I'd always misunderstood her. Like her comments were never daggers but rather innocent little remarks. But she didn't follow up. She didn't push because she must have known deep down in her cruel little heart that I wasn't flinching this time. This time, I was cutting her out. And this time, she wasn't coming back. There's a type of vengeance that doesn't involve broken glass or shouted voices and doesn't result in bruises, shredded clothes, or tire marks in a driveway. It comes on slowly, like poison in a cup of tea, something that tastes nearly good before making you sick. And when done correctly, no one can trace it back to you. That's how I began dealing with my mother, as if she were a silent infection that I was finally addressing after years of pretending I wasn't sick. Yes, it started with the photographs. But it didn't end there. Removing her face from images was just the beginning. Beneath that surface, the rot permeated everything she touched. And I wasn't finished pulling it out yet. First, I excluded her from the family calendar that Tom and I used to keep track of birthdays, appointments, preschool visits, medical checkups, and holidays. I removed her email address from the invitation list. She deleted all of the events she had previously been invited to. I wiped away the repeated reminders of her presence. She must have felt it too because less than a week after I cut her out of the picnic, she showed up on my doorstep. It was late Thursday afternoon. The light was softening, and the scent of sun-warmed mulch rose from the flower beds I hadn't tended to since spring. Emily was playing with a bucket of toy blocks on the floor, humming to herself in that delightful nonsense language that toddlers use before words make sense. Then the doorbell rang. I recognized who it was before I opened it. Margaret stood there, clutching a gift bag that looked like it had come from an upscale downtown boutique, complete with glittering handles and ribbons instead of wrapping paper. She wore her frozen half-smile, the one she used when she wanted to appear warm but didn't have the energy for it. And I'll give her this, she didn't start with a question, an apology, or even a joke. She simply said, "Thought I'd drop by for Emily." I remained in the doorway and didn't move aside. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. Inside, Emily stopped humming. She looked up, then toward the door, then back down, as if something in her little head wasn't quite right. Eventually, I let Margaret in, more out of morbid curiosity than grace. She tried to approach Emily carefully, crouching next to her and holding out the bag like a wicked fairy godmother dispensing curses disguised as candy. But Emily didn't approach her. She didn't even smile. She glanced at Margaret for a few long seconds before returning to her blocks and picking up the green one. As if the moment had passed, I saw my mother's face flicker in confusion, the corners of her lips sagging just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I recognized every crease in her face, every breach in her armor. She waited for Emily to get closer, for that innate infantile need to reach out to a familiar adult, but it never came. In that instant, something sharp and decisive clicked into place because even babies recognize when love is not genuine. I took the gift bag from her hands without saying anything, placed it on the table without peeking inside, and said the only thing that needed to be said. "I think it's time you left." She didn't argue. She didn't yell. She only nodded once and turned around, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she walked out of the house as if she had somewhere more important to be. But she didn't. Not anymore. Because I wasn't going to burn down the house with her inside. I was just making sure she never got a key again. I always assumed that if anyone was going to support me, really step up and say, "Yeah, she did that. I saw it too. She said those things," it would be my sister. Lisa was the one who experienced it alongside me, growing up in the same cramped house with the same oppressive restrictions and chilly silences that lasted longer than they should have. She was there when our mother called me dramatic for crying during Dad's funeral and then pulled her into the kitchen to whisper, "Thank God it wasn't you, sweetheart." I couldn't handle that. Lisa was present when Margaret would criticize my appearance before turning to her with a smile so warm you'd swear it came from someone else's mouth. We used to laugh about it in our 20s, lying on the floor of my apartment with cheap wine and takeout, calling her a jackal and mom when we were brave enough to do so. But we never dug deeper. We never asked why Lisa received the gold while I got the gravel. So when she eventually texted, "Can we talk?" I knew what was coming. The guilt, the confusion. "Maybe you're taking things a little too far." Even though I had prepared for it, I still felt a knot in my gut, the same one I used to get as a kid when Margaret called my name from another room with that tone that made you question if you'd done anything wrong, even though you hadn't. Lisa arrived with coffee in her hand and a tense expression on her face, as if she was trying not to frown but couldn't quite manage it. She didn't sit down right away, instead hovering around the kitchen counter, as if she wasn't sure she wanted to stay long. I waited for her to speak first since I understood how things worked. She needed to feel in charge of the narrative. "You've been editing her out of everything," she finally said, her words cautious and slow, as if she hoped that if she softened them enough, I wouldn't realize they were loaded with judgment. I nodded and leaned against the wall. "Yeah, I have." She hesitated and added, "Isn't that a bit much?" That was when I decided to show her the photograph. I kept it, printed it, despite my promise to myself that I was done with Margaret. Perhaps it was grief for the tiny part of me that still wished she'd someday say, "I was wrong. You didn't deserve that." But she never would. Instead, she went nuclear. I considered leaving the post unanswered, allowing her to sink in her own martyrdom while I remained silent. But then I realized that quiet was what had kept me shackled for so long. She felt most comfortable speaking in silence, saying nothing in response to nasty comments. When memory became uncomfortable, we pretended it didn't exist, expecting me to take every insult like communion. So, I broke the silence with a single comment, just one. "You should pray for the woman in that photo," I wrote on her page. "She doesn't exist anymore." By morning, there were over 200 comments. Some supported her, some backed me, but the ones that struck the deepest were the questions asking what really happened. For once, she didn't have control over the narrative. Something shifted in that place of uncertainty, in the vacuum of well-built lies, because people didn't need to know everything. Perhaps it was enough that she was no longer the only one speaking. Following the final confrontation, there was an unusual silence. When the ranting stopped, the social media dust settled, and the door I closed behind her no longer rattled, not because she stopped pushing, but because she eventually gave up. That was the solitude I awoke to on Thursday morning. A cup of coffee in one hand, I watched as Emily crawled over the living room carpet in her footed pajamas, her mouth chewing on something invisible, and her little fingers smacking against blocks that no longer lit up like they once did. The world felt quieter. Not quite peaceful, but hollowed out in a way I'd never experienced before. It was the kind of silence you get after gutting a house, where the floors still echo from what once lived there. I had been thinking about the baby book for months, ever since Margaret showed up with that gift bag and Emily shied away, as if her body knew better than to let the poison in. Something clicked for me that day, something essential and definitive. It wasn't just about eliminating my mother from the present. It was about denying her access to the future, ensuring that her shadow never crossed the barrier of Emily's recollection. Because children remember more than we realize. They recall the tone of voices, the stiffness in their mother's jaw, and how hands clench when the phone rings. I remembered. I recalled everything. And I wasn't about to let Emily inherit that history of harm. So, I started writing it by hand, which felt more traditional and spiritual than typing. I made my own baby book with pastel pages and gendered questions. Brown leather, thick paper, stitched binding. I composed the narrative of Emily's birth. Her fingers curled around my thumb as if she knew who I was. It was the first time she laughed at the dog's tail. She preferred sweet potatoes over carrots. I wrote about Tom installing her crib in the middle of the night while muttering under his breath, and how we debated whether or not to play white noise while she was sleeping. But I did not write about Margaret. Not once, not even as a footnote, not as a background character, not as a name scribbled beside guests or gifts. She was a ghost, and ghosts do not belong in baby books. Each page represented a little insurrection. Each line of ink was a means of saying, "You don't get to live here anymore." Tom observed me working on it in silence. He didn't ask any questions or make any comments. One night, he came over, took the finished book from my hands, and delicately placed it on the shelf above Emily's changing table, as if it were sacred. And perhaps it was. The next morning, Emily toddled over to that shelf, pointing with one chubby finger. She looked at me, her eyes wide and eager, and spoke her first proper sentence. Not just one word, but a full sentence. Nanagan. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I simply smiled, got down to her level, and said, "Yeah, baby, she is." It was not unkind. It was not even bitter. This was the truth, the simplest kind. The kind that doesn't require a story to back it up. Because Margaret had not just departed from our lives, I had made sure she couldn't return. Like a whisper, a twisted memory, a ghost pretending to be family, I did not kill my mother. I simply removed the thought of her. For a while, that was enough. The quiet gathered around us like dust on a windowsill. Tom and I began sleeping better. Lisa maintained her distance, unsure whether to embrace the silence or confront it. I didn't push her in any way.